Have you ever noticed how some mornings feel heavier than others? Before your eyes even fully open, your mind begins cataloging worries, the responsibilities waiting downstairs, the conversations you've been avoiding, the dreams that feel more distant today than they did yesterday. You reach for your phone, scrolling through everyone else's highlight reels while your own heart whispers the same quiet question it's been asking for weeks, maybe months. When will things finally feel peaceful again? You thought starting fresh would be easier. You believed that new beginnings would announce themselves with fanfare and clarity. But maybe peace isn't found in the noise of new opportunities. Maybe it's discovered in the sacred stillness of morning moments, when your soul remembers what it forgot in yesterday's chaos. Would you still believe in divine timing if it meant embracing the waiting instead of rushing past it? This is where so many of us find ourselves caught between faith and impatience. We know that morning prayer changes everything, yet we often treat it like an afterthought rather than the foundation it was meant to be. We grab coffee before we grab perspective. We check messages before we check our hearts. And then we wonder why the day feels scattered before it even begins. Your heart wasn't designed to carry the weight of uncertainty alone. Those restless nights when sleep feels elusive, when your mind replays conversations and rehearses worst-case scenarios, aren't signs that you're failing. They're invitations to remember that some battles are meant to be fought on your knees, not in your head. The ancient words found in the book of Psalms weren't written by people who had it all figured out. They were penned by souls who understood what it meant to wrestle with doubt, to cry out in the darkness, and to wait for dawn with desperate hope. Maybe that's why these 5 specific psalms have the power to transform your mornings. Not because they offer quick fixes or easy answers, but because they meet you exactly where you are. In the mess, in the middle, in the sacred space between asking and receiving. When David wrote about God being his shepherd in Psalm 23, he wasn't speaking from a place of constant victory. He was declaring truth over his circumstances, choosing to see divine care even when the path ahead looked uncertain. Sometimes the greatest act of faith is simply showing up to your morning with empty hands and an open heart. It could be that every sunrise is heaven's way of reminding you that endings aren't final, that yesterday's disappointments don't define today's possibilities, that the God who painted the sky in shades of hope this morning is the same one who sees your struggles and calls them sacred. Our minds crave immediate answers to complex questions. We want healing to happen overnight, relationships to be restored by lunch, and clarity to arrive with our morning coffee. But faith teaches us something different. It invites us to sit with mystery until peace becomes more familiar than panic. To trust the process even when we can't see the progress. To believe that divine timing operates on a schedule that transcends our human understanding of efficiency. The psychological truth hidden within spiritual practice is profound. When we begin our days acknowledging something greater than our circumstances, our nervous systems actually shift from survival mode to rest mode. The gamma waves produced during worship and meditation literally increase our capacity for wisdom and emotional regulation. Science is finally catching up to what believers have known for centuries. Starting your morning with sacred words doesn't just change your perspective, it changes your brain. Consider Psalm 5, where David declares his intention to direct his voice to God each morning and then look up with expectation. This isn't just poetic language. It's a blueprint for emotional resilience. When you speak your concerns out loud to a listening universe before you speak them to anyone else, you're establishing divine order in your daily routine. You're choosing to process life's complexities through the lens of eternal perspective rather than temporary circumstances. Maybe it was never about having perfect faith, but about bringing imperfect hearts to a perfect source of peace. Perhaps the mornings when you feel most distant from divine presence are exactly when sacred words become most necessary. Not because God needs to hear your voice, but because your soul needs to remember its true source of strength. Psalm 46 reminds us that God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. The phrase ever-present means that divine assistance isn't conditional on our performance or dependent on our emotional state. It simply is, like oxygen in the atmosphere, always available, always sufficient, always ready to sustain us through whatever this day might bring. The beauty of morning psalms lies not in their ability to manipulate circumstances, but in their power to transform our relationship with uncertainty. When you read Psalm 30 and encounter the promise that joy comes in the morning, you're not being given a timeline for when your specific struggles will end. You're being reminded that sorrow has an expiration date, even when you can't see it printed anywhere. This is where psychology and spirituality converge in beautiful harmony. Your brain is literally rewiring itself each time you choose faith over fear, hope over despair, gratitude over complaint. The neural pathways that once led directly to anxiety are being redirected toward peace through the consistent practice of morning reflection and prayer. Think of Psalm 38 and the raw honesty of David's words. He doesn't pretend his wounds don't ache. He doesn't mask his confusion with false positivity. Instead, he brings his brokenness directly to the source of healing, understanding that authenticity is the first step toward restoration. This is the courage your morning requires. Not the bravado to pretend everything is fine, but the vulnerability to admit when it's not. When you whisper Psalm 90:14 over your coffee, asking to be satisfied with unfailing love, you're not just reciting ancient poetry, you're rewiring decades of conditioning that taught you to find satisfaction in circumstances rather than in divine presence. Your nervous system begins to recognize a different kind of safety, not the fragile security that depends on everything going according to plan, but the unshakable peace that exists regardless of external conditions. There's something profoundly healing about speaking words that were born from someone else's darkness yet emerged into light. David's psalms weren't written during his victories. They were crafted in caves, composed while running from enemies, penned in the space between desperation and deliverance. When you read his words in your kitchen at dawn, you're joining a conversation that has been happening for thousands of years between human hearts and divine mystery. Your ancestors in faith knew something we're still learning, that the quality of your morning determines the trajectory of your entire day. Not because positive thinking manipulates reality, but because spiritual alignment creates emotional resilience. When you start with sacred words, you're establishing a baseline of peace that circumstances can disturb, but never destroy. Consider the neuroscience behind this ancient practice. Each time you choose worship over worry, gratitude over complaint, your brain literally strengthens neural pathways associated with peace and weakens those connected to anxiety. The gamma waves produced during meditation and prayer don't just make you feel better in the moment. They increase your long-term capacity for joy, wisdom, and emotional regulation. This is why Psalm 46's instruction to "Be still and know that I am God" isn't just spiritual advice. It's psychological medicine. In a culture that glorifies busyness and rewards reactivity, stillness becomes a radical act of self-care. When you pause before you panic, breathe before you respond, reflect before you react, you're choosing emotional intelligence over impulse. Maybe the reason these specific psalms have endured across millennia isn't because they offer easy answers, but because they validate difficult questions. They remind us that faith and doubt often occupy the same heart, that hope and heartbreak can coexist in the same season, that waiting and trusting require different muscles but serve the same purpose. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, you have a choice. You can reach for your phone and let the world's chaos flood your consciousness before you've even stretched your limbs. Or you can reach for something sacred, something that has been waiting patiently on your nightstand, in your heart, in the quiet spaces where divine whispers still echo. These 5 psalms aren't just ancient words on weathered pages. They're invitations to begin again, breathe again, believe again. If this message found you at exactly the right moment, write Amen below, and let's continue this journey toward morning peace together.